In this episode of Wood Chips and Black Steel, I'm going to tell you the story of this Winchester Model 1873. So stick around until the end and learn all that I discovered. So what's up, everybody? This was my great-grandfather's hammer. Now, my grandfather replaced the head sometime in the 40s. My father replaced the handle sometime in the 50s. Now, I have the hammer, and the handle's all taped up with electrical tape, so I need to replace the handle again. So the question is this really my great-grandfather's hammer? Or is this just the story of a hammer in one family that's traveled down through the years? And in answering the question, we then begin to wonder, where is the most historical value? Is the value in the hammer itself? We already know that it's not original. Or is the value in the story that goes along with the hammer for this one family? If you remember from the first Winchester 73 video, we talked about it was only original once, and that as every artifact travels through time, changes are often made to it. So in our discussion about restorations, how do we determine what level of restoration would go into the hammer? Because we know that the hammer's not original, but it's a great family story. So what am I going to restore it to? So let me bring the Model 73 back in, and let's talk a little bit about that rifle and its history and its story. So every restoration done well needs a starting point. Where's that starting point? It's only original once. So in order to know what you're dealing with, in order to determine that first question is restoring it to what, you need to understand where the artifact began. What was its starting point? And then from there, you then fast forward to its current condition, looking at all of the marks and mars and patina and everything that you can discover that's occurred to that artifact over time, and through that begin to understand what the life or the life story of that artifact is, and then begin to compare that to its original state. Now clearly there's a lot of reference material, there's a lot of books available that we can look at to sort of begin to understand the history of this model of the 1873. And there's so many ways, so many references to do. One of the current trends obviously is to do everything on the internet, and that has both good and bad. I'm a big proponent of written materials. So we have, for instance, this portable reference guide, and the portable reference guide is pricing and identification of 50 collectible rifles and shotguns, or it's called the Winchester Pocket Guide. So this has information, it has things that we can begin with, and if we go over to the section on the Winchester 1873, the information contained in here it's rather limited, but it's good information. It tells that what was the original chambering, 4440, 3840, 3220, and it also gives different descriptions of the different changes that were made to the gun. So it had carbine, musket, and full-length rifles. Had first model, second model, third model, 22 chambering. So it gives some really brief information, but it's a place to start. It gets that information beginning to unfold for you. One of the nice things, it gives some collector values, which I don't really care that much about, because what I know about collector values is collector values tend to be really regional, but it still gives you some basic estimates for values that you can look at. One of the nice things that it has is it has a list of dates by serial number. So I was able to start and look at the serial number on this gun and then compare it back to the dates of production that are contained in this book. And what I learned was that, according to the book, this gun was manufactured in 1883. It's a good place to start. So there are other things. You have these, for instance, Flaterman's Guide to American Arms. Again, it gives a lot of the same types of information, maybe expanded a little bit more. But to really get into understanding the gun and the complexity of the gun as it was manufactured, we have other references. For instance, this one is the history of Winchester firearms, 1866 to 1875. This is an old book. The copyright date on this is 1966. And then we have another one. It's called the Winchester Book. And if we look back, we see a copyright date here of 1961. And it's well researched, the amount of information that's contained in this. It's really valuable in its content because, again, it helps us to build a picture of this firearm coming out of the factory. So here's another thing. I knew that the entire Winchester Company collection of firearms were sent out to the Cody Firearms Museum out in Cody, Wyoming. And not only did the firearms go, but all of, or a great deal of the records went with it. So Cody has not only the firearms, but they have a lot of the manufacturing records as well. So I went online to the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, which contains or owns the Cody Firearms Museum, and I applied to them for all the information that I could get on this rifle. And it took roughly 6-7 weeks for the information to come back to me. And they shared with me what they had on file in the books for this particular rifle, which for me is just damn cool, all right? But why this is particularly valuable to me is because if we reference back to its only original once, I can then take the information that they provided me, compare it to the current state of the gun, and that helps me to understand how much change has occurred to this rifle over its history. What I did learn is that the gun was actually sent to the warehouse on December 27th of 1882. So in this guidebook, it says the manufacturing date is 1883. Which kind of makes sense because it's close to 1882. But the real date was December 27th, 1882. Now, knowing manufacturing and production processes like I do, having spent over 40 some odd years in the firearms manufacturing business, I know that nothing gets built the day that it gets delivered, that it gets built over some amount of time before that date. So the reality is, if we sort of project that back, this rifle could have been made anywhere in the last quarter of 1882. But we also know that it was shipped from the warehouse on December 28th, 1882, and that was literally the day after it was received into the warehouse. What I was hoping was that they would have some document that said this gun was shipped to here, to this person, to this company. And unfortunate to the story, that's not true. So this rifle was just sent to some store somewhere in the country, which is okay. But here's the other thing, or the other pieces of information that it tells me. It says that it's a rifle. And when you look at the books, knowing that it's a rifle gives me a sense of how long the barrel's supposed to be, as opposed to it being a carbine or a musket. It tells me that the barrel type is a round barrel, and it's a round barrel, all the way from muzzle to receiver. So it's the original barrel, or the leap or assumption could be that it's the original barrel. And I don't see any evidence here to suggest that this is a different barrel or that it's been changed. It says it has a plain trigger. I'm not entirely sure what it means to be a plain trigger. I haven't worked that one out yet. I haven't figured it out. I don't find any reference to triggers in any of the reference books that I have. And it also says that it's a half magazine, which is important because these Winchesters had multiple styles of magazine or tube lengths, and those tube lengths would go from these half magazines all the way to full magazines. And again, because it says that it's a half magazine and that I'm looking at this gun in 2020 and it's a half magazine, again, it helps me to identify or suggest that this gun is in its original condition or is original. Now that's important because I then have a better chance of identifying the gun further by looking at the reference materials that I have. So one of the things that helps us to decide how far a restoration should go would be provenance. Did this gun belong to anybody special? Was there anything special about the gun, where it traveled to, what it did, not only who owned it, but how it was used, that would help determine how the gun has to be restored or possibly not restored at all. Now, for instance, there's a great story out there about a Model 1873 Winchester called the Forgotten Winchester. And the story is about this 1873 that was found in one of our national parks, leaned up against a tree. Now, when they found the gun, they did everything they could to preserve the gun because it had literally sat out in the weather for decades. Now, nobody knows the story, and it's not likely that they'll ever know the story. But what the Park Service did is they brought it to the Cody Firearms Museum, to the conservators there, and they worked to preserve or to stabilize that rifle so that it wouldn't deteriorate any further from the condition that it was in. At this point, you ask, what's more important? The gun? Should we restore the gun? Should we do something to change the gun? Or is the story itself more important? So the provenance has meaning. The story has meaning. And if we were to take that Winchester and to do any kind of restoration work beyond conservation, beyond preservation, you've destroyed the story, and therefore that gun no longer has the value that it would have historically to anybody in the future. There's another famous 1873 that you would ask, well, what do we do with that? How would we think about that firearm in the future? And that one actually belonged to Buffalo Bill Cody himself. And that 1873 shows up in a lot of photographs of Buffalo Bill while he was performing his famous Wild West show. And I'm going to show you this photo that was taken in Concord, New Hampshire back in 1911, where Bill Cody's actually holding that Winchester in his hand. Now, that rifle also rests in the Cody Firearms Museum. That gun is beat up. It was a prop that Bill Cody used as a part of his show. Would you restore that, or would you actually leave it alone? Because the provenance, that gun is worth more in its condition or in its current condition than it ever would be if the gun was restored. My goal is not to discourage people from doing restorations. That my goal is to simply get folks to slow down and think about what they have in front of them and think about the totality of that restoration Again, using that it's only original once marker or starting point, and then figure out how much of what you have is original to the gun or to the object or to the artifact, and then think about how far you want to take it and how much of the story you want to save or preserve as you're working through that restoration. And then, like Bill Cody's Winchester or the Forgotten Winchester, what is the proper way to think about, or the proper way to handle, or the total distance to go with that restoration? But before I take you through my decision on this Winchester, I'm going to take you through the entire survey from muzzle to butt as we try and understand what is that current condition and how does that current condition compare against the original state of the firearm. So in episode 3, I'm going to do that. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.